What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in. It is November the 16th, 2021. We are here on our November monthly meetup. We have people from all across Canada tuned in. It's awesome to see all your faces. Thank you so much. Pretty normal format as you've witnessed before in previous meetups since the pandemic. We're on Zoom. I'd love to come around and give you all a hug, but I'll send you a little virtual hug. And I'm sure you know how Zoom works by now. We invite you to hop on the video so we can all see your face. We get a lot of energy from seeing face, and I'm sure our guest speaker does as well. And then if you have any questions, just head over to the right side of your screen. There's a little chat box there, and you can either private message either us or other members, or you can ask a public question or drop a public comment. So I'll just share my screen real quick, get into the presentation here. And Mr. Mulland, why don't you take us off?
Yeah, really excited for tonight's meetup. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it's our November 2020 meetup. Next. There you go. Just hit mute there. Pretty simple agenda tonight. As you guys know, we do our quick intro about who we are. If you don't know about us, you'll find out very quickly. And we have an awesome presentation tonight from a great development group local to Victoria here. It's going to be a pretty simple presentation. Be about an hour long or so, and if there's still Q&A at the end, we can go up all the way through till 7:30. But happy to keep you guys here. As you guys know, as presenters, it's so much nicer seeing faces when you're presenting. So if you have the ability to put your camera on, it definitely makes it a lot nicer for us. Open up the chat box, chat in there, communicate. Get to know some people, share some thoughts, share your questions. As well, if you want, you can click on the little three dots on your name there and click rename. And you can make your name say something like Marie from Surrey, BC. So you can actually say who you are, where you're from, and see where people are connecting from or anything like that. If you haven't joined our Facebook community yet, totally recommend doing so. We're up to over 1,600 members now, which is incredible, of other real estate investors from all across Canada speaking, talking, and chatting about real estate investing. So totally recommend hopping into there and continuing the conversations if you aren't there already.
And just in case that you can only tune in for, let's say, half of this episode, we're going to post the recording into our Facebook community as well. So you'll be able to rewatch it, pause it, listen to it, rewind, listen to it all over again in the Facebook community.
And we are going to take December off. Steve and I have a pretty busy next few weeks. And then coming into December, it's just a little bit hard. We're not quite getting the turnout. We're looking at maybe doing something local in Victoria here to go out for a beer and a drink. If people are local and want to meet up with us, then we can definitely talk about that. If we do decide to do so, we'll send out an email to all of you. If not, we'll be back in January.
Maybe a little Saturday social, you know what I mean?
And for those of you who don't know who we are real estate investors, educators, and developers. And our mission is to financially educate 1 million people and inspire them to invest in real estate so they can start living a more fulfilled life. This has been one of our biggest passions along the way. The reason Steve and I started really getting inspired to do more in real estate was our Go Big to Give Big movement, where we're inspiring others to go bigger with their dreams and goals so they can give bigger with their profits. As many of you know, we're very attached to Kids Sport Victoria. We just sponsored their most recent event where I think they raised, Steve, do you remember how much they raised?
I think it was 26,000 in the most recent one. I think the one before was their biggest raise ever, which was 36 and a half or something.
Yeah,
so
we're
50 grand in the last few months.
So we're big components of that. And what we do is we use our portfolio of real estate and the leverage we have as a brand to support with money contributions towards Kids Sport Victoria, as well as promotion of their organization. And it's been a great place for us to channel a lot of our energy into not just making a lot of money, but making that money matter, which is the conference Steve's going to this next weekend. A few things of why we're hosting this meetup and why we stand on the stage and talk. We've been running this meetup for 5.5 years now. We obviously have our online communities. We ran 2-day workshops, mentor programs. We run a mastermind currently with 50 real estate investors across Canada. We've helped tons of people grow their stuff. I think we've transacted just over $20 million in real estate now, raised a pretty significant amount of capital, and have been able to help a lot of people along the way. A lot of investors get invested into real estate, and we've just dabbled in a little bit of everything from single family to some Airbnb, some multifamily, and some development. So we've kind of been around the gauntlet, seen a lot of stuff, and are continuing to grow every single week.
On the spot accomplishment, Mr. Mullen, what's been one of your biggest or most favorite accomplishments in the last year?
Oh boy. I gotta say raising capital has been a pretty big accomplishment. Being able to raise that kind of capital in such a short period of time, I think is a pretty cool accomplishment.
Cool. I'll take that as a compliment, and I'll return one back to you. For those of you who don't know, Randy has put a lot of time and attention into learning how to be a ultimate leader, and seeing you grow in that space over the last year has been not only humbling and privileged, but it's been incredible to witness a lot of that practice come to fruition. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for just one sec. Maybe I'll go back slides so I'm not giving anything away. We have a really excellent presenter here tonight, incredible project that we'll be talking about. We got people from all across Canada here, and whether you're from Victoria, Vancouver, BC, across Canada, maybe even international, if you think of Victoria, Inner Harbour, this is probably something that you're thinking of. This is where everybody wants to come to in Victoria. Either you get off the cruise boat, you walk downtown and you're in like the thick of it, or you fly in and you stay in, a local hotel. All of the action kind of happens right here in the Inner Harbour, whether you got fireworks on Canada Day, Symphony Splash down here, you got busker festivals, pandemic pending kind of thing. The Empress Hotel is right here. The Ledge is right here. And this particular project, why it's like one of the reasons why it's just so freaking cool is that it's right here down on the corner. And for the longest time, it's been kind of an unused building. And watching, I live just kind of like on the other side of this grassy hill here. And so I walk downtown all the time. And so watching the development go from an unused building with really beautiful facade from, I think, probably like the early 1900s to being like shelled, like literally, like think of like an egg, you crack it open, you take the egg part out, but the shell stays there. It was shelled. And then rebuilt to include a lot of like the history that's there and the facade of the 1900s construction, but then pairing that with like new modernism, I guess I'll call it, or it's like really high luxury design. Walking downtown almost on a daily basis, I really got to see the full scope of like going from old building to complete shell to brand new building. And just over the last few months, we've built a relationship with our guest speaker and their company, and it's really just a privilege to have them here. And this building is just an incredible design. Randy and I got the chance to get a tour through it a couple of weeks ago before they got their occupancy permit. And I'm really excited to learn more about the process of it, some of their mindsets on it, ask a couple of fun questions, and really get to know more about Ceelo and their journey through Customs House. And if you have any questions as we get into it, drop them in the chat. I'll make sure that those get addressed throughout the presentation. But our speaker here tonight, let me just pop into the official slide here. This is the shell I was mentioning. So this is the facade. So this was all previously, old building. The deal was keep the facade, build new. And so walking past, this is Government Street and like Humboldt, which is like the downtown of downtowns, right beside the Inner Harbour. Like the Inner Harbour is literally right here. And we'd walk past and we'd see this go down, another story and a half, I think. And then it was just bizarre seeing a couple of steel beams, making sure that the brick wall wouldn't fall over. But just a really beautiful piece to watch it come all the way to fruition. And this is what it looks like now. Really stunning piece. They'll get into more of the architecture, I'm sure. Really high-end design. And absolutely, there's no better view in all of Victoria. We went up to the penthouse and we saw probably 200 degrees of like from Empress over to the Johnson Street Bridge, just nothing but ocean, skyline, and like all of Victoria's awesomeness. And so without further ado, the president of Ceelo Properties, Jonathan Sipos. I don't see you. There you are, buddy. Thank you so much for being here. Really excited to hear what you have to say and to go through the presentation. How are you, my friend?
Good, thanks. Hey, Steve. Hey, Randy. Hi, everybody else. Thanks for having me and looking forward to this.
Yeah, we're super looking forward to it too, man. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I don't want to waste any more time. I'll hand it over to you, and maybe you can just start with maybe just a little bit about yourself, Ceelo, and then jump right into it.
Sounds good. So my name's Jonathan Sipos. I've been working in real estate development for probably the last 10 or 12 years. It's a family company. My dad started it. Oh, did I lose you guys there?
Oh, you're good.
Oh, how do I get my screen shared there, Randy?
Just down at the bottom, you'll see.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Perfect.
Awesome.
Don't you love technology when it doesn't work the way you want it?
It never works when you want it. There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. It worked the first time, but not the second time. So I've been in real estate development for the past 10 or 12 years, working with Stan, my dad. And kind of this project has almost taken up the vast majority of that now. It's kind of funny. It's been a long process. This was the first project that I really started on in earnest, probably back in 2013, 2014. And we've just finally managed to have people move in and successfully complete the building. It's been an incredible landmark project. It's been a once in a lifetime project that I've been honored to be a part of. And it's been, I don't think there could be a better learning experience ever out there. There's been so many complexities that everybody involved in the team, even people that have been in the business from the construction side for 30, 40, or 50 years have said they've never come across the types of complexities that have come up in this project. And it's really been kind of as unique of a project as I think you could ever find. And it's a building that would fit in the biggest cities and the best locations in London or New York. It's got this sense of old world style and this kind of classical sophistication to it, yet it fits in so perfectly with what Victoria is, which isn't too overbuilt and not too large. And I think it fits in with what our architect Paul Merrick said was the 3 grand dams of the Inner Harbour, which was this location, the Empress Hotel and the Parliament buildings. And I think you could go to any city in the world, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find a single better location than Victoria's Inner Harbour. Anybody that's visited Victoria or is, lucky enough to live here, I think we can all agree that it's really quite a special and magical place. So this project had a lot of significance for us, and it was one that we knew we couldn't take lightly. And I think that was an approach that we took from the beginning. Was this was almost a bit of a public service given the location, and we couldn't cut corners, and we couldn't just go for simply the most cost-effective solution all the time. And there's a lot of situations when we kind of dove into it where the intricate design detail, we had to put that first and make sure that we didn't compromise the little details. And when you kind of get up close and personal to it, as Randy and Steve did, you can really start seeing those. And they don't always come through in the photos, but when you're up close to the building, you can see why it took as long as it did. And you can also then see why we sold condos for the price points that we did. And I'll kind of try to dive into the project and talk through the challenges that we faced in it and the timeline and kind of show you guys, I think.
Unknown caller. This is a forwarded call. Press 1.
Is that me? I don't think so.
Nope, sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, perfect. So as I kind of mentioned, this is one of the 3 grand dams of the Inner Harbour. And when we started this project, we didn't really go into it with a preset notion of this is how big we want it to be. This is how many stories. This is how many condo units. We didn't even really know what the final product would be. There's a pretty blanket zoning on it. It could have been a hotel. It could have been condos, office. And we did study all of those options to really see what was the most feasible solution for it, what would fit in the best in that part of the community, and what would make the most economic sense. I think you always have to marry all 3 together: the economics of a project, the community interaction of a project, and then I think the overall viability of them. And it's always a delicate balancing act, but it's important that you focus on kind of, I think, all facets of a project to ensure that you're successful and that the community supports it, that the city will support it and get it passed, and that, of course, it's economically viable. Otherwise, the projects can't get built. It is a very large project. The project cost on it is over $100 million. It's extremely sizable. There's only 57 condo units in the building, but the average square footage of them, I think, is upwards of 1,600 or 1,700 square feet. And we have a lot of condos that are in that 2,000, 2,200 square foot range. And they're really not condos. They're more like homes, as Randy and Steve saw when we walked through it. And I think what that did is it appealed to, people that were looking to downsize out of homes, and they wanted a condo, but a lot of condo offerings, they're usually quite a bit smaller. And what we noticed about those is that the smaller condos, you kind of reach a ceiling and a price point of what you can do. And correspondingly with that, if you can't sell the condos for enough, you're not able to build a building outside that's architecturally, I think, is interesting and is exciting. And you can't use the materials that we did if you're not selling them for this price point. So it's kind of a bit of a catch-22 where the cities wanted something special here and wanted something unique. And in order to do that, and in order to fit in with the Parliament building and the Empress, we had to build something that was far more artistic. And in order to do that, we had to sell condos at a much higher price point. So there was a lot of reasons why we had to sell the condos for the price points we did. And I think the simplest one was there was no way we could build what the city wanted without going down this price point route. But at the end of the day, it's such an important part of Victoria and the Inner Harbour. And I think the metrics are quite stunning how many pedestrians walk by it per year. But pre-COVID, I believe we had 3 to 4 million pedestrians walk by this part of downtown every year. Obviously a lot of tourists, but certainly a lot of locals as well. So it's probably one of the most seen locations in parts of Victoria, and probably one of the most seen in, kind of visited parts of Canada. When we started the project, we didn't really have much pricing guidance of what we thought we could sell condos for. But we knew we could certainly break the market. When we started, I think the market in Victoria was probably $900 a square foot, maybe $850. And I think when we started selling, we had to come out at a high price point because of what we were building. And we've been very blessed and lucky to achieve a price point of about $1,500 a square foot on average. And I think now the price point in Victoria is about $1,100 a square foot on average, maybe $1,000 depending. We also sold a penthouse relatively quickly, probably in, I think it was in late 2018 or maybe early 2019 for just a smidge under $11 million, which more than doubled the record in Victoria and was quite a landmark sale. And I think what it did is it started putting Victoria on the map internationally. And we were getting recognition in Toronto and certainly in Vancouver and Seattle, but people realized that Victoria was really becoming this global destination. And this was, I think, correlating and playing into that. So it was quite an interesting process to go through the sales and see what we could do. One of the other unique things I think about this building that I don't know if you'd find any other condo buildings in the world that have this is we have 43 unique layout types. I think normally a condo, you're going to have 5 or 6 or 7 layout types, but what we had here, because the building steps in as it goes up and artistically kind of changes all over the place, it was impossible to just kind of do, a unit plan A or a unit plan B. We had to craft the inside of the units to match the outside. And I think typically, if you're looking at a more common development, you're going to almost design units and then design the building around them. Whereas here with our architect, we kind of told him to design a building that fits in with this location, and then we'll go from there with the condos inside of that. So it's an interesting process that's maybe not typical, but it was what we needed to do in this location.
Can I ask you a quick question? I don't mean to interrupt you, but just thinking about some of that cost per square foot, like you guys bought this how long ago?
In 2014.
So 8 years ago, well, basically 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Back then, were you thinking like, geez, we have to make $1,500 a square foot?
No,
that was like never even heard of or thought about even in Victoria. Like, what was your mindset going through some of those crazy numbers?
I think back then we were probably, I can't actually remember. It was so long ago, but I know at the same time our construction costs back then were, if you could build for what you could build for back in 2014 or 2015, it would be just a miracle, I think, these days. So as our price of what we sold the condos certainly went up, the price of what it cost to build it went up correspondingly. So I think all things considered, and I think that's probably pretty accurate on almost any project, is as you see the price of the units going up, it's not because the price of building it isn't going up. They're usually hand in hand. And this was no different.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. The design team was interesting here. We had Paul Merrick, who was recommended to us by somebody on city council as being kind of probably British Columbia's foremost, I guess, heritage architect. He's the best at designing these classical buildings. And if people are interested in New York architecture and whatnot, there's an architect there called Robert M. or A.M. Stern, I believe, and does some stunning limestone clad buildings. And I'd say that Paul Merrick is almost British Columbia's version of who Robert Stern is. And this building, I think, is very similar to what he designs. We used a Vancouver architecture firm for the kind of the base building documents, kind of a different skill set and discipline, generally speaking. And we had a great list of consultants, and interior designers were from Vancouver, or structural engineers were from here. It was a great team of people to work with, and I think we've been working with them hand in hand now for 7 or almost 8 years. Kind of a rough timeline of where this project was. It wasn't a quick project to get approved, and it wasn't a project that we wanted to rush into a rezoning process and put in front of council and the public without ensuring that we had a wide range of support. Most importantly from city and from the heritage community, because this was such an important heritage building, given its location and given the size of the walls, that it was tough to design a new component to it. And I'll talk into later why there's really 2 parts of the building. There's a heritage component and a new component, and they had to work together, and the design had to kind of work together as well. So it was certainly a slow timeline. I think we were in the city, I guess, from start to finish for about 3 years. And in that time, we redesigned it 3 times. The first design probably looked more like the Empress Hotel with more peaked roofs and that sort of design. We then kind of adjusted it as we went and ended up where we are now. And I think we just got our occupancy permit, I believe, on the 29th of October, and residents have started moving in. And it's nice to see finally cars and people and pets and dogs kind of in the lobby. It's a nice kind of from start to finish. The biggest challenge, as I mentioned, was definitely the civic approvals process. It's always tough when you're dealing with so many different groups and different, objectives to make everybody kind of happy. That was certainly a challenge. Then working with these heritage walls, the heritage walls were, I think they were from 1914 is what's been remaining, is what was there. And so they had a lot of heritage significance. They were in pretty poor condition at the time though. So we had to figure out how to incorporate those into residential, where sometimes what was there in the past was not a residential building at all. It was a customs and storage building. Actually, that's why it's called the customs house. We then had to determine, what do we want to do here? We had the zoning for condos for rental. We could do a hotel there. We could do an office. We could do a brewery distillery. We could do pretty much almost anything in this location. We'd certainly studied all of them, but at the end of the day, the most feasible option to let the project succeed was to do a split of high-end luxury condos above ground, 57 of them, and then ground floor commercial retail. And I think it's a great combination for the location, and it was probably the only one that would succeed at the end of the day. COVID-19 definitely caught us off guard. The first probably 8 or 9 months wasn't too bad. It was just reduced manpower and trades on site given COVID restrictions on work. And then honestly, this year in the last 7 or 8 months is when we really started getting hit with material delays, and we're still facing them. We can't get interior glass for almost any reason. And apparently it's because of that large bomb that went off in Lebanon and blew out all the glass in the city. And that put such a unexpected shock into the glass system that we still can't get glass from China. So we're waiting on mirrors and shower glass, frustratingly. And then again, just more challenges with the heritage walls, and we'll get into that later. This is what was here originally. And many people don't realize when we started our demolition process, people thought we were tearing down a heritage building on Government Street. And it turns out what we were tearing down on Government Street wasn't actually a heritage building. The building that you see here in these photos, this beautiful building that was on Government Street, actually partly burnt down in the 30s, and then they tore it down in the 50s and built this new monolithic boring block. What they had here originally was one of I think the more beautiful heritage buildings I had certainly seen, but sadly it wasn't there. The height of our building that we've built on Government Street and Wharf, the tallest part, is more or less the same as what you see here in this photo, which is just a smidge under 8 stories. What you see here in this photo, the building on the left, this kind of, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but this area here, these are the heritage walls that we preserve today. And this portion here is what they kind of built and sadly burnt down, kind of tore down. And this here is kind of a street that no longer exists, but this is also what we saved here today. Interestingly, you can see a carriageway here. This has kind of been incorporated into our ground floor commercial, but this wall and the windows, we did not touch anything above ground floor. We changed the ground floor openings, as you'll see later. They don't work for commercial retail, but we kept the upper portion identically. And you'll see that these signs are now back on the bollards, and it is really quite an interesting heritage wall. The size of it, the scope, and it was owned by the federal government since 1894. So they'd owned it forever. They realized it had no seismic integrity, and I think about 2008 or 9. They did a bunch of studies, wanted to see how they could redo it, repair it. But they realized that basically if there's any semblance of an earthquake, the whole thing would come down, and it's just not acceptable from a safety perspective. So they decided to sell the building, and that's how we ended up acquiring it there in 2014. Here it is across from the Parliament buildings, the Victoria Legislature. And so it's always kind of been, as some say, the gateway, along with the Belmont building beside it, into Government Street in Victoria's downtown. I was always interested in seeing how they built these things back in the day. It might have been quite a process. When we started our demolition and excavation, we had a pretty good idea of how long it would take, but I think it was vastly more complicated than everybody involved ended up expecting it to be. And that's usually the challenge in buildings, is it's pretty easy to quantify building something up, but it's very tough to quantify what happens in the ground and tearing it down. We have 93 parking stalls, 3 levels of underground. Interestingly, we didn't have a parking requirement from the city of Victoria, but knew that people at these price points and in a building, and I think just generally in downtown, they still are going to have cars. And so we wanted to ensure that we had the capacity in the building to have them. They all have electric charger capacity, which I think back when we started marketing and selling in 2017 wasn't widely being done. Interestingly, a lot of old buildings, you couldn't go and put every stall as an electric charger. The buildings just don't have the electrical capacity. So we made sure that the building had it from day one. Important, I think, to plan ahead for that. When we started tearing this building down, and this here is what I was referring to as the building that was built in the 50s. And it was a very dull kind of concrete structure. And then what they did here is they added on a bunch of fiberglass to make it look like it was a heritage building, but behind that, it was just plain concrete. This safe here, we actually ended up saving it. I think it's stored in a warehouse somewhere. And that's the only cool thing that we got out of the building. Unfortunately, nothing else in there.
Was there anything in the safe?
Nothing in the safe. I don't even know how to lock it or open it, really. It's just kind of sticking there. Tearing it down was, I think, Victoria's biggest tourist attraction when it was happening. Everybody on Government Street was quite surprised to see what we were doing. And then here, when we got into the heritage building, you could see from that new portion was all concrete. We got here into wood. And that was a large part of why this thing was just seismically unsafe. Here's the walls when we started cutting away the floors, basically with a chainsaw off the walls. And you'll see later how we ended up supporting them. It was quite an engineering feat. Here's a pretty cool photo that really shows what we ended up doing. We had to design a steel exoskeleton that we drilled and anchored into the street outside with large concrete blocks, and then use something that's called a whaler, which is basically like a vice grip. You kind of have a bunch of wood on the inside that's sandwiched to steel on the outside, and that just holds the building like this. And there's just so many of them that in theory, the building can never fall over. They say it's engineered to like 100 kilometers of wind. And apparently we exceeded that a few times, but luckily nothing happened.
Was there ever a moment of nerves when you're taking the building down and you're doing this stuff that is this, because if that goes down, that's a whole different world.
It would have been really bad. Again, that was probably one of the challenges in the demolition is the guys, when we started blasting and excavating, this was all rock under here. They had to use much smaller blast charges than they first thought, just so that this thing doesn't start shaking. And I think luckily there was only one blast that a small piece of the building right up here started shaking. It didn't come down, but there's only one blast. I think it was our last blast on the whole process that caused a bit of a scare. But when you were standing at the bottom of that hole and looking at probably at 100 feet of rock and then wall, it was a bit of a scary process down there. This is, I think, something that people don't expect. These were the heritage foundations. So this here used to be solid bedrock. And then this was rock chips. And then this was dirt and like leftover brick that back in 1914, when they built this thing, they just piled it together and then started building a wall on top of it. There is no foundation. There's no concrete down there. There's really nothing seismically safe. It was honestly a miracle this thing was standing as long as it did. And so this was, we start excavating down and you find these problems that you can't see ahead of time. And this was something that I think we tried to really bring and show to a lot of people at the city and say, a lot of Victoria's Old Town could be at a lot of risk because of situations like this. And there's just no cheap and quick way to fix it. It involves a lot of steel, a lot of concrete, and a lot of time. And it was definitely an eye-opening experience when we got down there. At the very bottom of the hole here, we're just actually slightly below sea level, which was pretty cool. Luckily, no seawater was ever coming in there. I think the rock was so solid everywhere. And I think these were kind of interesting to see the process down at the very bottom. People always are asked, what keeps the wall standing today? What we did is, it was kind of a new process in BC at the time, is instead of putting a rod through the whole wall and then a plate on the outside and then kind of like tightening that plate, which doesn't look that good and will rust, we ended up coming up with a solution here that these anchor bolts, every 8 to 12 inches, we drill them into the old wall with epoxy, and then we pour our concrete slab to integrate these into the slab. And there's just, I think there's like 4,000 per floor, which is an immense amount, and it took forever. But basically, there's just thousands of these anchor bolts into the old wall at every floor that the wall can't theoretically ever fall over. That's what they say. I don't think the amount of them is just kind of crazy. So it's apparently the best engineering solution for old buildings and walls. And this is a close-up of that heritage whaler that I was explaining. That's what kind of kept the building standing during the time. And every floor, just thousands of these things, which again was much slower than we ever expected. Another reason that we had to tear out what was inside of it was the old floor heights. I think it's an important process when you're designing a building to say, if you're sitting in a chair, can you see out the window? People don't really think about it. But here, when they first built the building, nobody cared about looking out because it was for parcel storage and kind of security and stuff. But we knew that for condos, it was very important to have the view. And so when we built it again, we made sure that we raised the floors up high enough to the window so that you could see out. And here, this one is probably 8 inches below the window. And then up here, the floor is probably about there. And so they change on every floor. But this was an interesting kind of process. And you'll also see that this is all kind of like a stucco on the inside of plaster. And you'll see later that it's all brick walls now. And behind all the stuck or plaster was brick that we originally never planned to incorporate. But when we took the plaster off, we found this beautiful brick and decided, instead of drywalling over it, let's refinish and expose this heritage brick. This is, again, kind of looking at the new half of the building now. And when we built it, the floors never aligned. So the floors in the heritage building versus this, I guess we call it the new building and the tower, they only align on the 5th floor. And why that was the floor to floor heights on the heritage were like 14 feet from the bottom of floor to the top of the kind of floor because of the old windows. And on a new building, you're going to generally go for between 9 and 10.5 feet. And so we designed these two buildings mostly separately. They're separate elevator cores, separate lobbies. Legally, it's one building. Legally, there's one parkade. There's kind of a shared fire alarm system and all of that. But in essence, it was 2 full slabs. So while this portion of the building might be 7 stories and this one is 5, it was as if we built a 13-story building there. I think this is actually maybe more like 8. This is looking inside of the finished building on the heritage side, where we started working on refinishing the brick. And you can really see the height of the ceilings here. This is probably a 6-foot tall guy there. And he's, barely to the top of the first window. And something that people were always surprised about was they thought the windows were really small, and Steve and Randy can speak to this. When you go into the heritage building, the windows are actually huge from the inside, but the wall's just so thick and big from the outside that you don't really expect it.
That actually blew my mind. Like when you're walking down Store Street, which is the waterfront straight around the corner, kind of like looking into the Inner Harbour, you see like, I don't know if you have an exterior shot real handy, but you see these little tiny like square windows that are just like riddling the side of the wall. And you're like, all right, cool. Like maybe you can like kind of stick your head out there and like look around. But walking through, you can see the size of the scope of them through the inside. And when we took when we first walked into that, third or fourth floor one and got the full scope of it, like very, very bright. And these windows were huge.
Yeah, it's been, I think, it's been interesting. People ask which side sells fastest, which side is the most popular. And I think it really spoke to the whole project, and that we almost had something for everybody's kind of taste and preference. And we had 25 condos, I think, in the heritage side, and like, I want to say 37 in the new side or something like that. And they basically sold equally. We've got 7 left, and we've got 3 in the heritage side and 4 in the new side. So there's a really equal take up between the two. And they both had so much kind of uniqueness to them and character that it was really quite interesting. Another question that we get a lot is the limestone facade of the new building. And I guess I should have shown a photo of it first, but it's all clad in limestone, and the limestone came from Portugal. And from a COVID perspective, that's been a shipping nightmare. We finally got stone that was meant to be here in March 2 weeks ago. So it's just kind of crazy. You just can't plan for that. But what they do is they just kind of drill these anchor bolts into the concrete. There would technically then be insulation behind here. Then they put on these metal support grids, and then they just slide stone onto tracks that are then screwed into these vertical grids. And that's really all they do. And completely seismically safe and structurally sound, but a very slow process. And it was interesting to see how they stick these pieces of limestone that each weigh probably a couple 100 pounds onto a building. And they can do this system going up 40, 50, 60 stories. But it's really quite a unique process. The team that we had do it was called Scorpio Stone, and they came in from Edmonton, actually. There's just not a lot of local talent when it comes to complex masonry buildings. It was a really limited field. I think there's a lot more of it in Europe, where they have skilled stonemasons and people that work with stone all day. But in North America, I think it's probably a dying industry, which is too bad, because some of the work they can do can just be stunning. Another one of our biggest challenges that I mentioned was how to cut through the heritage wall. By and large, we didn't cut through it in many places, but where we did, we had to make extensive alterations. These were areas where before, as you see here, the floor was here and the window was up here. And that just doesn't work from a residential perspective. So we kept the top of the window the same there, but then we had to cut down all this way. And these here were, I think these were limestone blocks that were probably 500 or 600 pounds a piece. And so cutting those out to make it like this was a process that probably cost 10 times more than we expected and took 5 times as long. And there's just no way to quantify that or plan ahead until you physically get in there and you start cutting this and saying, how do you keep the wall seismically sound, but do this safely? And you can see here the thickness of the wall. These things are massive. They get thinner as they go up, and this is probably the thinnest part of the whole building. This is another photo on the ground floor where we had to cut in extensive openings. This was formerly a window, and it went right to about that height. And I think, an average person would stand about there. And this was also basically no window and door. And then this on the right is what we have done to it after the fact. And it's key when you do commercial that you have enough light and space into it, so that you kind of create that pedestrian flow. And I think what we've done, people will be really surprised of just how great the space is inside on the ground floor. And I think that from a retail perspective, it'll be some of the best anywhere in the world. But again, from a complexity perspective, when you deal with heritage, you just can't plan that out ahead of time. And there's no way to really, I think, do it simpler. This here is our main parkade entry gate. It is basically a hand-by-hand removal of these massive blocks and then supporting this up here with concrete and steel before we start cutting these out. One of the items that we did kind of, I think, really differently in this project, and that we've tried to, we didn't really maybe advertise it in a big way, but we knew was important, was building condos that I think were at a higher quality compared to others when it comes to soundproofing, when it comes to insulation, when it comes to quality of materials, basically behind the walls, where it's easy to kind of save money and not do it right. But from a long-term perspective, I think people will really appreciate what we've done is we did glue down floors, they're not floating. And that kind of involved a whole host of other problems, from how flat the floor had to be to this underlay mat to keep it extra soundproof. We insulated every wall and every ceiling inside the unit. So like your bedroom to your living room has insulation in it. And in condos, that's just mostly unheard of, I think. But it was something that we knew was important given the quality and what was going on here. We worked really hard, I think, during the construction process to protect everything. All of our cabinetry came from Italy. And, one of the most frustrating things is to go into a condo and see damage and see stuff like that. So it was worth spending extra money as we went on things like protecting all of the cabinetry, protecting the stone islands, protecting the floor all the time, just so that you don't have kind of, wasted damage and whatnot. On the photo on the right is a process of us leveling the floor. You have to hit a tolerance of basically 3/16 of an inch over 10 feet, which is really quite a high bar to set, but it was, it's the goal for concrete, and it's what we had to do for the floor. So you end up spending a lot of time grinding, leveling, pouring self-level on it so that they're as flat as really possibly can be. And an interesting thing, I think, on the heritage is we have ceiling heights of 13, 14 feet, which doesn't really show up in the photos, but Steve and Randy, when they walk in there, you kind of see these expansive ceilings, and people are always blown away by the height of them.
How much of that brick were you able to save, I guess, and how many units get some of that exposed brick? I know it's just like the heritage side, but there's 30 or so that with that.
I think that's probably about right, just a smidge under 30. We tried to expose it everywhere we possibly could. The only places we couldn't was where walls went into it, like here, or when we had columns on it. But we tried to expose it and show it and refinish it, because it's such a unique feature. You just can't fake it. And the actual old brick from back in the day, it has a different feel to it. And apparently it's because they were all handmade, so they all have a bit of unique shaping to them, whereas nowadays they're mass produced in a factory and they don't come out the same. A bunch of our finishing packages were, I think, by and large at a different level to Victoria. All of the cabinetry came from Italy, 100%. There's no, Italian door, and then the boxes were made here. It was all shipped here from Italy, which luckily we weren't too held up with that one on COVID because we ordered it soon enough. Our appliances, we luckily got those ahead of time. I think now if you want an appliance, it's like 8 months. It's kind of crazy. We have full air conditioning, heating, and cooling, which I think is important. We put in electric blinds. We recessed the blinds. We did a lot of small intangibles that are tough to really show to people ahead of time. But at the end of the day, when they've come in there, they kind of see these features and finishes, and they understand that it's definitely at a different level for Victoria. We had two color schemes. We had a light and a dark. I just have photos of the lights here. This was a unit on the tower side, which is our new section. These ceilings are probably about 10 feet. You can see here this gap around the windows. This is where we recessed all of our blinds. So you'll never see them hiding and blocking windows. These grills up here is where all the air conditioning, heating, and cooling comes from. I think it was a really timeless design that our interior designers went for. They didn't want it to be too modern or too classical, and they wanted to strike that balance right in between. I think they've done a great job. All the floors are heated. Heated towel racks. We strive to put in curbless showers everywhere, which from a construction perspective, probably wouldn't want to do it again. It's a bit of a nightmare, but at the end of the day, it's a beautiful product. Here's a great photo without the mirror because we can't get mirrors. Hopefully it's here sometime soon. This was a unit. Yeah.
No question. What's so difficult about a curbless shower?
Definitely.
Just like the angling to make sure that's all draining in the right direction.
And that's by and large the problem. But when you're pouring a concrete floor, they're usually about 8 inches thick. And to have a curbless shower, you need to have the concrete recessed by about 1 inch, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then you have to kind of move where the steel is in the slab beneath it so that you can lower the concrete section in that by 1 inch. It just runs into a lot of technical construction challenges that are maybe not as easy to predict, but at the end of the day, it's a phenomenal kind of feature because you just don't want the water pooling out into the rest of the unit. So this was one of our heritage units on the second floor. I think it's stunning. You can see parts of the sandstone protruding through into the wall. We left that unfinished and kind of showing what it was. These were old concrete headers that were in the wall originally. We gently refinished them, but we didn't really want to do too much to it. And then down here on the right is what Steve was referring to before. These windows really look quite small. I think these windows up here are these windows right here. So they look small, but when you're in here, I can assure you they're really quite large and impressive. They do open. They all open down from there to there. If the bottom opened up, we'd have a safety issue. So we were kind of limited. An interesting feature is every closet in the building has built-ins. So like every entry closet, every hallway closet, And you go into a lot of condos nowadays and you get no closets, and it's kind of a pain. So we knew that we wanted to make sure that every single closet had one. And these were
of all the things you didn't show, you didn't show the nice chilled wine coolers that you guys put in some of the units that I was fascinated by.
I'm missing those, aren't I? I guess you can see a little bit of it right here, but a feature we tried to put into every unit was either a wine fridge or a full climate controlled wine wall. I think this one here, you can't see most of it, but I think it holds about 350 bottles. So they're pretty cool pieces.
Very, very cool feature when you walk in and then there's just this glass door and it's all just wine holders and chilled and everything. And it's pretty spectacular. There's definitely a lot of thought that went into it for sure.
Easy to build at the beginning, but if you wanted to go and retrofit and put it in, you'd have a hell of a time. So we wanted to make sure we did them from the get-go. And that's kind of basically it, I think, for the presentation. Would love to take some questions and see what people think and what they want to know more about.
That's awesome, dude. And I see there's a couple of questions in the chat here, and a couple that I just want to start off with. And thank you so much for, I'm sure it was maddening to try to go and find all those pictures and then put them all in a sequence. So I appreciate the time that you spent on tracking all that down. I'd love just to rewind back to like almost day one. So you look at this project and it's got basically do whatever you want zoning to it. It's owned by Canada. One, how was negotiating with a federal entity? And two, what was the process like to decide, like, did you go through feasibility studies? Did you just be like, yeah, you know what, I want condos? What was the process like to eliminate the hotel or mainly commercial or office and specifically kind of target, a high-end condo?
Yeah, to start with buying it from the federal government, it was an interesting process. They had spent, I think, 2 years studying the building to see if they could do anything with it. So when they decided to sell it, they hired a real estate agency, marketed it, sold it. Probably not too dissimilar to buying a property from anybody else, really. They had the mandate. They were told to go out and sell it. And that's what they did back in, I think they decided to sell it in 2012, and then the process started from there. In terms of the feasibility studies, I think from day one, we had looked at, could we renovate what was there? That was our first step, is could we take the existing building, come up with a way to retrofit it, do something to it? But there was no way to really do that. There was one elevator, no underground parking, zero seismic integrity. So that was out the window pretty quickly. The second option was, of course, studying the hotel route, studying office. We did go down the office road for a while, but the office market back in 2015, 2016 in Victoria was really not that great. And so it didn't gain, as much traction as we might have thought. And then really it kind of was between condos, large condos versus small condos, rentals, or a hotel. And at the end of the day, from a development perspective, the most, I guess, the surest option there was to go down the high-end condo route for the location, because it allowed us to sell them at a price per square foot that enabled building what we built outside. And had we not sold them at that price, we could not have done a limestone clad building. We couldn't have done the heritage restoration that was needed. So that was the only way to make the project feasible.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm curious, like, this is such a unique build. And, you mentioned comparing it to, London and New York. I've been to 29 different countries. And one of the things that always fascinates me is the history, the architecture that's there. Walking through Singapore is like, it's literally a concrete jungle. They have, 100-story buildings with forests growing out of them. It's incredible. So when you decide to go through and build this, like, combining the history of it, the old facade, along with the new modernism, which you've done an incredibly beautiful job at, by the way. I'm just wondering, like, a staple like this, what does it do for your brand? What does it do for your business? Lots of us as wannabe developers and wannabe real estate investors, like, we all probably dream of building something like this. So dangle the carrot a little bit for us. What's it do for your business?
I do really believe it's a once in a lifetime legacy project. It's a project that we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to do. And I think it shows that there's no complexity of a project that we can't tackle after this. There's no size of a project that we can't do. And I think it really speaks to when we want to build at a high-end quality. We had not done anything at this quality level before because that just didn't exist in Victoria. But I think it shows that we can build at the highest quality possible and that we can go down that almost individual custom home detail in multifamily, which doesn't exist anywhere else. These are really 57 individual custom homes put into a multifamily package. And I think from a brand perspective, it sets a foundation for, I think, every project moving forward, just because of where it is, what it became known as. And I think by and large, the public reception on it, even from people who originally weren't a big fan of it when we first, kind of a lot of heritage advocates and stuff thought perhaps it was too large and too overbearing. But, having talked to them, it was nice to hear that they all really liked what we ended up doing, which was really nice feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no kidding, man. I got one more question. I know Randy's got some. I see some in the audience here too. My question is about like problem solving. So, from day one, trying to figure out, what the best feasibility is, to walking through the timeline challenges, drilling 4,000 holes in the wall, which took longer, flattening the concrete, making it, perfectly level, took longer. I'm sure the city didn't move things along the whole, speedy type of process. So then COVID happens, tourism disappears. I'm sure you had, random questions about, revenue, like asking for massive discounts because of tourism disappearing. With all of those challenges, how are you able to keep a sane head and finish this, I guess? Like, do you have a lot of like problem solving background? Did you get some pieces from sport that you played in the back, previously? Did you get it from, your dad, or where did that problem solving come from, and how did you tackle it?
Me and my dad, we have a great relationship. And I think that he's been doing this a long time. And I've got, I think the two of us, we have a very complementary relationship where we can bounce ideas off of each other and go back and forth and debate things. And I find that between, I think, his experience and my kind of, I guess, younger upbringing and, a different perspective on the world, the two kind of coming together, I find, can come up with really unique solutions. And we both have a very on the ground mentality. We're physically on the construction site every day. We're probably there for at least a couple hours, working with the trades, seeing what the problem is firsthand before it kind of gets bounced around to the architects and everybody else involved. I think sometimes the best solution is to physically go there and talk to everybody, talk to the architect, talk to the plumber, talk to the guy physically doing it and getting solutions from them. Because a lot of the times the guys actually building it can have the best solutions, but nobody asks them. And I find that going directly to the source of this is the problem, what's happening, how do we fix this? And just asking the question and not leaving until everybody in the room comes up with a solution. And we tried to do that for so many items, because when it starts getting sent back and forth in emails, you can get lost and nobody really knows what's going on. And it's that physical just being there, talking to everybody and having that debate and an argument if you have to, because one guy says it should be this way and somebody else that way. You can work through it that way. And I think that's on a project like this was invaluable. And I think without doing that, I don't think you could have gotten past a lot of these challenges.
It's brilliant, man. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
That's perfect. Tie into my quick question here, and then guys, we'll get to all your questions in the chats here right after. But I just want to point out, it's very cool that you guys go and talk to site as an electrician for 10, 12 years. One of the things I wished was that I could just go talk to the architects and explain to them, hey, I can't get a wire through this wall, and what you're asking is incredibly hard. If we just adjust or change one simple thing, it makes my life really easy and saves the project. So very cool to hear that. And my next question was, it's basically just you and your dad that run this company. You guys don't have a team of 40 employees below you. You don't have a ton of assistants. You don't own a full construction company that's doing all this for you. So how does just, I'll say simply, like, how do two people go and manage and run a project like this? And how did that whole subbing out process go? Like, do you just hire one GC and then just talk to them and they take everything on? Or do you guys have a lot of control or say over what happens throughout the project?
I think that when we started, it was just me and my dad, Stan. As we went, we did hire a couple of people, and we now have, I think there's probably 4 or 5 of us in the office as we went. But for the first couple of years, it was just us. And I think how we were able to do it was I think the two of us combined have a lot of experience in this. And I think we also made sure to work with really great subtrades and people that we knew would help find solutions with us. And that when there was a problem that arose, they wouldn't just put their hands up and say they're going to, kind of stop until we come up with it. And I think it was a collaborative process from the architects through calling in Paul Merrick to deal with things, through calling in, we have a great team of consultants and engineers involved. And I think it's surprising that you don't need as many people as you might think to build these things. At a certain point, what I noticed about real estate development is that you have to have a pretty good understanding of the overall picture to be really effective. And if you're too siloed and all you do is just marketing and all you just do is sales or just construction, those two might not talk to each other. And then you're going to do construction changes without coordinating with the marketing and sales. And so I think there could be a lot of challenges to having a ton of people if it's not tightly integrated, especially on a large complex project where things are always moving. But I think it was really just a great team of everybody around us as well. And the fact that we were involved in a day-to-day basis on the site all the time, I think helped overcome those challenges. Very cool.
That was my one question there. Steve, I don't know if you want to start jumping through some of these question chats here.
Yeah, definitely. Len, I see that you got your hand up. Thanks for waiting patiently. Unmute yourself, ask your question, and then I'll jump into the chat and ask Johnny some questions there.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. That's an amazing project. I've been a big fan of your guys since you did the Vogue. And
thank you.
Did you guys get the 10-year tax revitalization incentive? So now for 10 years, because you did all those seismic and structural, you do get that with the city?
That was a nice benefit. I think that was one of the few really great benefits of it. It's an amazing city program. As you know, we got it at the Vogue as well. And we did get it. So we ended up getting 51% off of everybody's property taxes for 10 years. And so that basically, it accrues to the benefit of the purchasers, but it is a nice program. I think it's good to note as well that the tax revenue, even with 51% off, is still something like 10 times more than it was before the building was built. So the net benefit to the city is still massive. And the cost of that tax holiday does not come close to offsetting the cost of saving those heritage walls, but it's a nice benefit to have.
It is great for the future owners, and I'm sure they probably appreciate that. And definitely thanks for your presentation.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, dude, awesome presentation. I'm just gonna rattle off a couple of questions that were here in the chat. Rob is asking, how many units are still for sale?
We have 7.
7 to go. What's the start at?
2.7 million.
2.7 start, and then the top east penthouse was,
I think,
it's
about around $9 million.
Cool. Which the view is worth every penny of that and then some.
It's pretty special up there. It's one of those projects that you have to go, you have to tour through it, you have to touch and feel things, you have to see the lobbies, you have to see the height everywhere. There's a lot of intangibles that are just you can't really convey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't come across on a presentation, doesn't come across on like a live or an Instagram feed. You walk through it and your jaw hits the ground.
Mm.
Ellen is asking, she says, it's stunning. Is the city now realizing that they have to do more seismic work on its other buildings based on what you uncovered regarding like the lack of proper foundation?
It's interesting you say that. During, I think, one of our council meetings, unfortunately, what happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, their terrible earthquake, I want to say that was in 2015 or 16 had just happened. And Mayor Lisa Helps actually referenced that in relation to our project and said, if we don't get more of these heritage projects approved sooner, we do run the risk of this happening to other buildings. The money is just not there for it. I think it takes such a comprehensive redesign and such a comprehensive revitalization that it's just not possible in a lot of buildings.
I think another factor of that too has to be like the unique location that you have. Being that you're basically waterfront. Like the beach isn't right across the road. You've got a little bit of parklets there in the harbor, but you have I don't know, probably the majority of your suites have ocean views, and probably no other heritage building other than maybe like the Reliance ones down the way have that opportunity. Like there's a bunch of heritage ones on I don't know if you can see my screen, but on the right hand side of that image down that road, but they're all obstructed by their buildings. So even if you could do something similar, you're not going to get the revenue out of it because you don't get the views.
It's a bit of a catch-22, like you say there, Steve. There's no perfect solution. I think fingers crossed that a lot of these old buildings were still built pretty well.
Andrew, I see you got a question in the chat, but I see that your hand is also raised. Lana, can you just raise your hand there? And then Andrew, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Jonathan your question.
Sure. Hi, Jonathan. You said this is a once in a lifetime project for yourself. And for your team. You don't come across projects like this very often. Now that you've completed something that is of this big an undertaking, what do you see in the future? Are you going to take a little gap for yourself and sort of enjoy that, or are you right into the next once in a lifetime project?
It would be great to take a bit of a gap, but I think we'll probably keep things going. Always looking to do more projects, probably simpler and faster projects moving forward. Would love to do projects in other cities as well if we could build something like the Customs House. But I think in Victoria, there's such an opportunity to keep building rentals, to keep building, I think all asset classes from industrial to rental to condo. We live in such a beautiful spot. It's going to continue. So we're going to keep working and keep doing it and seeing what happens.
That's great. What category of building are you looking at doing at this time?
I think we've been taking the deepest dive into purpose-built rental in conjunction with possibly condo, but with where federal interest rates are, purpose-built rentals right now are very attractive. The rental market continues to rise, and with the CMHC financing programs out there, I think it's important to take advantage of those while we can. If the cost of construction keeps going up, though, I think we're going to have to go back and build more condos, as it's a really delicate balance between, kind of making them economically viable and building rental. They're much tighter margins to begin with. So condos are, if the cost of construction keeps going up, we'll see more condos.
Thank you.
Thanks for your questions, Andrew. Ali's asking, how are the exposed heritage walls insulated?
It's a good question. We've had that from a bunch of people. Basically all old heritage walls, there is no, in essence, insulation outside of just the thickness of them. Our walls are probably anywhere from 2 to 3 feet thick. And it's really just that thickness of materials, probably 4 to 5 courses of brick and then sandstone, that kind of moderate the temperature both ways. There's also upgraded heating and cooling systems to accommodate for it. There's no condensation that's been accumulating on them over the time of the construction. And really, it's just the same thing that you'll find in any other heritage wall building, like the Vogue that was earlier references. These walls are just how they were built 100 years ago, and it worked back then. You just have to have more heating and cooling.
Awesome, man. Thank you. I think that's most of the questions there in the chat. There's Rob was asking if you're based out of Victoria, which you are, and if you have another one, and if you're looking for capital. So there's some definite keen interest here from our community. I've got a million questions. Sorry, go ahead.
I got a quick question, and I don't know if maybe you addressed it from Grant there about how did you finance it?
Oh, I didn't see that.
So how did you finance the project with the heritage and all the different stuff that goes along with it? What did the financing process look like? If you could just high level walk us through kind of financing for a project like this, because I'm sure not many people have thought about the financing side of it.
It's always, I think it would surprise people with, how much, bank debt's involved in large projects, as they're all highly levered projects. It boosts the IRRs and the returns dramatically the more you lever it up. We had a large lender partner that was involved with us from basically day one on this project. They were great to deal with. They believed in the site at the beginning. Not a lot of people saw the potential of it way back in 2013, 2014. The city of Victoria was in a very different space, but they saw the vision, they believed in it, and they knew that we could pull this off. And it was, it was a great partnership to work with them and to go through that. At a high level, you're going to have to usually hit a pre-sale target on condos, usually between, say, 40 to 60%. It kind of varies based on the project. That's to give the bank or the lender a surety that this thing is buildable. One of the nice things about rental, as I was mentioning earlier, that we're looking at is there's no pre-sale requirement, which can be attractive on that perspective. But basically, after you hit your pre-sale requirement and after you get a building permit, that's kind of all you need to get it going and to get it financed. You have to have adequate contingencies to accommodate cost overages and potential delays. Those can always be a challenge. And I think that's why you have to start projects to make sure that there's enough profit margin day one to cover unexpected things that come up. And we were lucky that, as the project went out, everything worked out well. But it's always a risky undertaking with those things, but that's the business that we're in. And we've been blessed to have a great track record doing it. And kind of, I think that's why we take it so seriously. And that's why there's not a lot of vacations.
To frame that in a way that I heard it was being able to sell yourself to a lender and find somebody that believes in the project like you do. So obviously you guys had someone good. I don't know if you went through a lot of lenders, but you hear a lot of people talk that it takes 5, 6, 7 conversations with different lenders to just find somebody that's got the right appetite at the right time for the project you have and finding that connection. It's not like going to a mortgage broker and they're funding thousands and thousands of them a week. This is a little bit more intricate where you're building that relationship and building a lot of personal connection with these lending companies, and they're really vetting you and your projects and who you are. And that's how a lot of the lending is based on, is the relationship that you have, the belief you can instill in them, and showing your ability to perform. So again, when Steve asked earlier, this is your flagship project, what does that mean? I'm sure now when you go to a lender and you say, look, we did this with this financing and this is who we are, again, that'll just allow you to improve and grow that financing relationship you have with the different lenders.
I don't think you could have said it any better there, Randy. And I think moving forward, we're certainly looking and, excited to start working with more individual investors as well on an individual basis. I think it provides more flexibility, and it can sometimes be easier process to do it that way as well. And it's an interesting divide. It can be sometimes easier just to go and deal with one large lender. But then there can also be a lot of benefits to dealing with a lot of investors in a project. So both definitely have their benefits.
My last question for you, Jonathan, is just, it's really, I guess, for like the starter here in the group. We've got a ton of people on Facebook and 45 people here tuned in live. Lots of them are, established investors, people who have a number of income properties and are starting to look at development as a way to express their creativity, a way to create an additional revenue source. Maybe it's a passion project, etc. For those starting off who may not want to jump into a flagship project right out of the bat, but where would you suggest people who are just starting off to really like get their feet wet and move forward in this development space that seems to be evolving every other week?
I think that real estate over the long run is the best asset class you can ever be in. I don't think that there's a safer, more stable asset. I think it's something that more people should be invested in. I think that the stock market and the crypto sphere, those are all great to be in, but I think by and large, the majority of people's assets, I think, should be in real estate, just given its long-term security. And I think getting into it's such a case-by-case basis. If you want to get into doing something more hands-on, I think that getting into buying and renovating or trying to do value add is always the best play. I think buying an asset that has a certain value day one that can't really go down, but has the potential to go up, I think is a super safe way to get into it. That's maybe buying something and adding in a suite, creating some value there, and then selling that and flipping it. I think that can be an exceptional way to get in without a lot of capital risk. I think getting into buying, maybe a rundown commercial building where you have a couple tenants and the outside looks terrible and it needs new windows and new paint, but you put that on there and maybe that costs you, 10% of the purchase price, but all of a sudden that building at the end of the day, you can raise the rents by 25%. You can get a more stable, tenant in there, and then you can sell it for a lot more. I think that if I was, when I tell my friends what do I suggest that they do, I think it's getting into value add. If they don't want to take the big risk of doing the rezoning or doing the full build from start, where there's a higher risk, but certainly a higher profit margin. I think that value add sphere is a really great one to be in.
Amen to that, dude. And sorry, I just had one more kind of fun question, more personal side of things. Like, if you could go and replicate this project or something similar anywhere else in the world, where would you do it?
I guess from the places I've been, I've seen a spot. I think what made Customs House special is that it was the only location in Victoria that people would agree is the single best. I think if you go to like Vancouver or New York or Seattle, there's so many great locations. And I think that that's what made this place truly unique. I've been to Napa, California a number of times, and there's a spot downtown there that is very similar to what Customs House is. I think it would fit in perfectly with the tech community in San Francisco, and there's no high-end condo offerings there. So that would be, in the dream world, that's where I'd love to go and replicate what Customs House is in downtown Napa, California.
And if you got to spend more time down in California, that doesn't suck either.
It would be a pretty nice commute, and the weather's a lot better. So.
Yeah. Awesome, Jonathan. Well, everybody who's still tuning in, go throw some praise into the chat there, and thank Jonathan for being here. Really appreciate the time it took to be here and present and chat with us, as well as all the time it took to prepare this presentation. Ali's actually asking if you have an Instagram page for Ceelo or for Customs House.
I have one personally. I think I do have one we have one for Customs House. I think it's Victoria Customs House or Customs House. I'll try to find it and put it in there.
Cool. Yeah. If you could just take a second, drop your own contact details, like Ceelo's website. I put the Custom House one in there, an email address if you're open to that. And if you don't mind, just stopping sharing your screen, and I'll finish off the presentation while you just toss that into the chat.
I just want to thank everybody again for taking the time on their Tuesday to listen, and really appreciate the support and the nice comments.
Yeah, I think it's cool for a lot of us here that are locals anyways, who have probably followed along, for the last half a decade anyways, through all this project. It's really special to see and witness for sure. As for us folks, that basically does it. Just got a couple more slides that I'll walk you through really fast so you can go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Jonathan's going to toss his contact details in the chat. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody who tuned in, of course, as well. We always appreciate the support, and I know our speaker does as well. If you loved it, if you hated it, we want to know. We want to make this the absolute best meetup across Canada. So if you can, just go hop onto either Google or Facebook or wherever you like to call home base, and just drop a quick little review there. You'll also get a little bit of a survey from Luma, which would be great if we read them all. We want to get your feedback, and we want to make this, like as I said, the best we possibly can. If we don't do a December social gathering of sorts, happy holidays, happy New Year, all that kind of fun stuff. The next time we'll be here is January 18th. That's the very latest, same time, same place, unless things change. Maybe, who knows, maybe we'll be in person by then, which would be a nice change of pace for sure. And then, if you want to get a hold of us, here's how to do it. We're on Facebook, we're on IG, we've got a website. You can always drop us a line. And if you're curious on our mastermind too, you can always check out Synergy Mastermind. And with that being said, that's a wrap. Randy, anything else that you wanted to say?
That's it. That's all. Thank you everyone so much, and happy holidays.
Awesome. Jonathan, thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to getting out there on Victoria Golf Course with you soon. And if we don't see you before then, have a great holidays yourself. All right. Thanks, everybody.